Time to bring my first guest. Joining me now is the Australian's Washington correspondent, Creighton. Adam, thanks so much for joining us here. Huge week. Let's start with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's state visit in Washington. Tell us about the visit. All went smoothly?
Yes, look, it was a fantastic visit, I think. I mean, it was a big success. It was certainly long. It was 4 full days. I think the Prime Minister actually left just a few hours ago. His last formal function was at the State Department in this gorgeous Benjamin Franklin dining hall, where he was welcomed by Kamala Harris, the Vice President, and also the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He spoke very well. Look, I mean, he spoke well throughout the whole trip. So I think it's a big success for him. I mean, whether that plays domestically well back home, I suppose remains to be seen. But I mean, he couldn't have asked for a better trip. And indeed, the weather here, everyone was talking about it all week. It really was very sublime.
Well, that's great, but then there were some other interesting bits about the diplomacy here, especially around China. And Joe Biden cautioned Australia against fully trusting China. Now, do you think that had to do anything with the Albanese government's moves to normalize, smooth out relations, and some of the disputes about whether or not that Port of Darwin lease would be allowed to continue?
Yeah, certainly there was no mention, publicly at least, of the Port of Darwin situation, but certainly some in the American administration would be concerned about this move to normalisation. But I think there's an understanding as well that for Australia, China is a very important economic partner, and so we have to kind of straddle these two worlds, both kind of being an ally of the United States, but also we have to maintain our economic relationship. It's very difficult. I think the Albanese government so far is treading a reasonable path. I mean, I don't know about the Port of Darwin thing. I maybe wouldn't have approved that, but more or less, China seems to be taking off its tariffs and so forth, which is a good thing economically. But of course, we have to be careful, and that's what President Biden said, that we have to trust but verify. They were his words.
And now, those were Reagan's words, too, about the Soviet Union, quite famously. But talk us also through some of the congressional jitters that have been vibrating out of Washington around the AUKUS deal. Is there an actual threat to AUKUS? Could Republicans take it down because they're concerned, about the ability of the U.S. to build its own submarines?
Well, it's really interesting, this situation, because if you talk to administration officials and very senior ones, such as Kurt Campbell, who I spoke to just a few hours ago, actually, at the function that I just mentioned, he's extremely confident that all the relevant legislation will be passed this year. And that's the same message that you'll get from Carolyn Kennedy and from other senior figures. So the administration is very confident. But if you talk to analysts on the ground in Washington, they say that when push comes to shove, the US is going to be unwilling in a few years' time to part with what would be about 10% of its submarine fleet, because so much of the US submarine fleet is currently in for maintenance and so forth, and it's well behind production schedule. I think they're building something like 1.2 submarines a year when they really need to be building at least 2. So there's a huge number of bottlenecks here. So there's a real contrast. And look, I mean, I can't predict the future, but certainly the Prime Minister is confident too, as you suggested. He met all of those congressional leaders just this morning and also yesterday, and they said all the right things. So look, it remains to be seen over the next few months, I should say.